He was 38 years old at the time. And if you looked at his life, it looked very similar to people that you may know, maybe even some of you in this room. He was married, 3 kids, 2 dogs, 1 mortgage. He worked for a big national company, the Fortune 500 in fact. He had big company benefits. Their health insurance was with a large national carrier, in fact the largest in the world. It was all packaged nice and neatly by a big national broker. But unfortunately, like all too many in this country, his life looked very similar for other reasons. You see, because at 38 years old, my brother had not taken the best care of himself. He wasn't getting the regular, routine care that most of us need. When he needed something from the medical community, he sought it out at various urgent care clinics, never seeing the same doctor twice. There was no continuity. There was nobody overseeing his overall wellness. There was no central point of contact keeping track of his evolving and complex health conditions. So when my brother started having chest pains, he asked himself a series of questions. Who do I call? Where do I go? What's this going to cost me? And it was that last question that almost cost him his life. You see, because my brother delayed going in at the first signs of his chest pain. He let them linger and continue until he could no longer delay. He ended up in the hospital by way of an ambulance through the ER. And over the course of the next several years, he would be hospitalized over 30 different times. He had so many ologies and ologists involved in his care, you needed a phone book to keep track of them all. It was hard to figure out who was in charge of his care. He was bounced around between 2 different hospitals depending on which doctor was driving that day. He had so many surgeries, so many tests, stents, so many medications. And then there were more medications that were prescribed to offset some of the adverse side effects that landed him in the hospital. And ultimately, it resulted in his financial demise. And it didn't have to be this way. And the most ironic thing to me, and actually it's quite mind-blowing, is literally 2 miles down the road, I had a client, much smaller, not a Fortune 500 company, a large regional employer. They offer free health care to their employees, end-to-end health care, starting with direct primary care, concierge medicine. If you need something like labs or x-ray or imaging, we've got an access point. No out-of-pocket cost to employees. If you need an outpatient surgery, there's an access point. No out-of-pocket cost. You need inpatient hospitalization. That's available. They've got direct contracts and other ways to manage that cost. They've been able to figure out how to provide free health care to their employees. How have they done it? Well, that's the beauty of this conference, and that's what I want to share with you today. That's what I hope you take away from this, from your time here at the U-Powered Conference. But they started with their ownership and executive team, determining where are the misaligned incentives and conflicts of interest, where are health insurers and providers profiteering not only from their company's health plan budget, but also their employees. And they started by solving that. Again, that's the beauty of this conference, and that's my hope for all of us, that we're able to take away some nugget today and tomorrow and take that back into our home communities to have an impact. If you're here, it's because you've had this realization. If you are here in Puerto Rico, it's because you've had this realization that we are at a dead end. We're at the edge of a cliff. We're looking at those who have fallen over that cliff, and we are standing behind looking at folks that are getting ready to go off of that cliff because of the system as it exists today. We know that change has to happen. Why? Well, the status quo, the current system is a zero-sum game. Employers are paying more, employees are paying more, and they're getting less. If you look back at what health insurance has costed, healthcare services have costed over the last 25 years, you can see astronomical growth in the costs, and people are getting less for what they're paying. But there are wins in our industry. Many of us are experiencing this with our own clients, which is what I want to share with you today. When I think about the stakeholders that need to be involved in that solution, it's the providers, the employers, and the employees. How do we create a win for all three of those? There's somebody that's intentionally left off of this slide, because healthcare decisions need to be made locally, not by a third party disinterested and only interested in profiteering off of our health plans. So how do we do it? What does it look like? Well, for providers, we're talking about creating steerage, creating volume. And we do that by giving them preferential treatment. In exchange, they're giving us better pricing. It allows those facilities and providers to be the good guys in their local communities. If you think about it, and there's been a lot of news coverage of this recently, providers sending people to collections, even suing them in court. There's an entire apparatus that's tied to our healthcare system for administration, for collection of payments. We can do away with that. We can allow Hospital A in that market to be the good guy. They don't charge for their services to the employee. Employees can go there at no out-of-pocket cost. It allows them to be the good guy. In turn, employers have the ability to win, because the claims that come from those facilities and providers, they're lower cost. We give those providers and facilities preferential treatment. In exchange, they give us a better price. Lower claims costs translate into lower insurance costs. There's a direct correlation here, right? Whatever your healthcare claims are going to cost, what they expect to cost is what your insurance premiums need to be to at least offset those costs. As health claims costs go down, so can health insurance costs. That results in higher profitability for companies. Higher profitability translates to higher cash flow for these companies, which drives valuation. A lot of these private companies, their stocks aren't publicly traded, but they know what multiple they trade at. And as their profitability and cash flow goes up, so does their value. It also results in happier employees. And I put this here as a win for employers because I think about my brother. How productive do you think my brother was showing up to work, in and out of the hospital, worried about paying his medical bills, being a guinea pig of the system? One thing I'll share with you there about my brother's story that I didn't share earlier, and I was hesitant to share this, but I think it highlights and underscores the point about his situation. As he was going in and out of these hospitals and nobody was really overseeing his care, he became a guinea pig for the system, for the big hospital there in Houston, Texas, in the medical school. And let me give you an example of what happened that I think really underscores how employers and employees can win in this system. He had a series of surgeries, one of which was to install a remote monitoring device in his chest to monitor his heart pressures. It was a $75,000 surgery. $75,000. And almost a year later, we found out that neither the physicians or the hospital had the equipment or the software to even read the device. What do you think his insurance company did when that bill landed in their claims department? Denied. Not medically necessary and experimental. Where do you think that bill landed up? In his mailbox. In his mailbox. How happy and productive do you think he was the next day when he showed up at work? Think about the rest of the employees, their experience with healthcare, the billing that happens, out-of-pocket costs, the more they pay out of their paycheck. We would be silly to think that that does not have an impact on the productivity, how somebody shows up every single day at work. I can guarantee you this. My brother was only there for the health insurance. He was not there, he was worried about surviving. This is a way to help employers and help employees at the same time. So the employees win. Over time, they have lower insurance costs. Typically, in subsequent years after we implement plans like these, employers are going in and lowering the per paycheck costs of health insurance to employees. Immediately, we're able to provide access points for health care that are no cost to the employees. It's putting more profitability back in employees' back pockets, allowing them to live the life that they want to live. We're also making choices easier for employees. When you have a big PPO network, everybody's in network. The good doctors, the bad doctors. There's very little coordination of care. We're making choices easier. We're making healthcare easier for employees to understand. We've vetted the market. We're providing them the best of what's available. Let's talk a minute about the impact here. Impact is a two-sided coin. Typically, when we're talking about healthcare and health insurance, we're talking about the negative impacts. But that coin has another side. I see that as opportunities for us. I see it as opportunities for our employer clients, for the employees, their families, our broader economy and society. But let's talk about the economic impact here. These figures are from 2022. About $4.5 trillion of our economy was attributed to healthcare. Those numbers in 23 are estimated to be north of $5 trillion. It's the largest sector of our economy. So that's between 17 and 20% of our GDP. Think about how much money is wasted in that system, how inefficient it is. It's like an anchor holding us back. If you could unlock 20, 25, or even 30% of that and reinvest it somewhere else, in manufacturing, in technology, other innovation, pay raises for employees, what sort of economic engine could that be for the rest of our economy? I think many of us would agree tying more dollars up in the healthcare sector is probably not the best use of our money. It's not the most efficient to spur growth. And I think about what keeps it that way. I think a lot of it's tied to the influence, particularly the lobbying that's happening in Washington. By my estimate, and these figures are available online, over $6 billion has been spent lobbying politicians in Washington over the last decade. That's a lot of money over a long period of time. You would think that if somebody wanted real change, for $6 billion in a decade, we would have something better than we have today. What are they lobbying for? What's the goal? And then when I think about how it impacts our personal finances, there's different studies that have tracked this, but estimates are between 40 and 60% of bankruptcies in America are related to medical debt. How many lives are impacted in our economy? Where else could that money be used if it was not spent on medical care, medical debt? What does their life look like? Insurance is intended to protect us from catastrophe. Yet a very significant percentage of our bankruptcies are tied to medical debt when the majority of those folks had insurance. That's not working. It needs to be solved. Okay, well, let me just tell you. Anybody here, have you seen Moneyball? A lot of people have seen Moneyball. You recognize this picture. This is Brad Pitt speaking with the owner of the Boston Red Sox, and he's talking about the changes. Brad Pitt, he's this Billy Beane, he's this alternative viewpoint in baseball. Baseball had always worked the way that baseball worked. This guy brought a different idea of how to run a team, how to build a winning organization, how to get more for less. Sounds really familiar, doesn't it? It can't be done. Can't be done. And in this talk, the owner of the Boston Red Sox is telling Billy Beane, the first one through the wall always gets bloodied. And the people that are in control, they have their reins on the system. They have their hand on the switch, and they go batshit crazy when something threatens their way of life, their way of doing things, whether it's in business or baseball. It sounds very similar to what we face today, does it not? Are they a broker? Are they a consultant? Are they an advisor? They're contrarians. They're activists. All sorts of names for what it is that we do. But I would identify it, and depending on the client and where they are, depending on what they need, we might be one or all of them combined. But the one thing that we are, all of us in this room, no matter what role you play, whether you're a clinician, whether you're an advisor, whether you're a solution provider, we are the ones that stand between the system, the way that it works today, pushing us towards the edge of that cliff and profiteering off of us, and the employers, many of which do not understand how the system is designed. There are so many people that don't like the way it works, but they don't understand it. It is the work that we do, standing between them, fighting for people that don't have a voice or a say in the way that the system works. That's the responsibility that each of us has, no matter where you are in the system. So how do we do it? What I want to share with you are the 3 pillars of my consulting when working with employers. Now, each of these 3 things has different iterations depending on where I find a particular client. Okay? There's many of us in this room, the approach that we take is, burn it down, baby! And I wouldn't disagree. The system is broken. It's extremely flawed. But in my home market, and I operate primarily in Texas, when I think about how many employers are running high-performance plans that are completely optimized, it's a small percentage of the market. As I look and survey the land, I'm in Texas, so I like to use farming analogies. As I look at the pasture, okay, there's a lot of employers that are far out into the pasture that still think Blue Cross is my friend. United Healthcare is my friend. Don't they have the same interest as me to lower insurance costs so they can make more money? That's a common misconception. So I can't walk, trust me, I've made this mistake. I've walked into an employer that's at that part of the pasture saying, let's burn it down, and you scare people off. I've scared off potential clients. And so it's important to meet people where they are, knowing the path they need to take to get there. So each of these 3 pillars build on each other. So the first one is economics. This is simply, how do we structure the plan? We all know there's fully insured and then there's self-funding, right? And there's a lot of different steps in between. But make no mistake, and I want to highlight this, because as we try to work with employers, there's large employers that we can do a lot of really creative things, and then we have small group employers that perhaps they can't self-fund. What do we do? Interestingly enough, there are options in a fully insured plan to build on with these other 2. But depending on what the client is, where they are in their journey is going to dictate what we can do in the further steps. So my plan indexes very heavily towards self-funding, teaching employers how to self-fund. Most of my clients are fully insured when I pick them up. But as many of you in the room know, even if you're self-funded, you're bundled with a carrier, ASO, and they manage your stop loss and your PB, and they're managing everything. That's not an efficient structure. So we index towards self-funding, carving everything out with an independent TPA, managing the pharmacy. I call it managing the stack. That's everything from med management to the vendors that are involved in the health plan. We're rebuilding health plans for employers. But the second phase of this is eliminate, and this is wasteful spending. Every dollar that's spent in a health plan has to be accounted for in the income of the plan, which is premium. The more we spend, the more we have to take in. And so particularly where we're focused here is we're figuring out how to remove wasteful spending and overpayment for claims at facilities and providers. And there's a number of ways that you can do this. Reference-based pricing is a common one. Using direct contracts, DPC, care bundles, oncology, care navigation, steering members to the most cost-effective providers inside the plan. We want to eliminate wasteful spending on prescription drugs. We want to work with PBMs that will allow us to use patient assistance programming, manufacturer programming, international sourcing. We want to be able to customize the formulary because there are certain drugs in these big national formularies that don't make sense for certain employers. We're looking for lowest net costs. We're not chasing rebates. And one thing I want to spend a minute or two on is lost dollars in compensation to third parties. I don't think this gets talked about enough. And yes, I'm talking about broker compensation, but I'm also talking about compensation for providers, for vendors that are involved in the health plan. And just like medical claims, every dollar that's spent in healthcare costs, every dollar that's spent in compensation also has to be accounted for in plan costs, whether direct or indirect. If somebody is paying a broker, if somebody is paying a vendor, that money is coming from somewhere, and it's coming from the employer and the employees. So not only should it be disclosed, it should be quantified. Let me give you an example. I recently picked up a brand new client. They've been with a national broker for many years. And when I'm meeting with this employer, they're telling me that over the last several years, they'd gotten high single digit, low double digit increases. The broker continued to bring out to them the renewal and said it was a no shop. This was the best option they had available to you. This was about a 100 employee company or so. And so when I'm talking to the owner of the company and I'm asking him, well, how's the broker compensated? What was in their disclosure to you? Help me understand this, how this works. Because I'm trying to figure out what's the pitch here, right? Like what's the angle the broker has? And we're looking at this disclosure together, which I think is a great thing, right? For our industry, disclosing compensation, it's something that we should all be doing. There's this disclosure that there's a $50 per employee bonus that they're going to get at the end of the year. So I asked the owner about this. Hey, this $50, what does this mean to you? I'm just genuinely curious, what's their viewpoint on this? And the owner says, Jimmy's making $50, it's $5,000. $5,000. I was like, doesn't really move the needle, does it? And he's like, no, it doesn't move the needle. Okay. Well, this particular broker probably has 500,000 to 1 million lives with this carrier. And as I tell the client that, he's doing the math in his head. He's like, wait a minute. That's $25 to $50 million. Is that a meaningful number? Hell yeah, it is. Because it's not the individual broker at the field level that's making the decision. You know where those decisions are being made? About what do we show our clients? Who needs to get approval to move a client from a particular carrier, particular year end? You know where that comes from? That comes from the very top. The people that see where those bonuses come from. How do I know? One of them in my prior life in finance was my client. I had that conversation financing their acquisitions, and they're telling me, we're going to get a really big bonus. Nobody's moving a client from this particular carrier until we close the end of the year. That's a real thing. Let's don't kid ourselves. That drives policy inside of some organizations. It's buying influence, which is why they pay those bonuses. It needs to be quantified, not just at the client level. We need to explain how the system works. So once we've solved for the economics, once we've eliminated the wasteful spending, we now have the ability to enhance the benefits that these employees are going to get. We're trying to reduce the premiums that they pay out of pocket. We're waiving costs for their services. We're making their lives better. You're getting high quality providers, no out-of-pocket cost. But even more importantly, we're creating access, more access to healthcare. I think about my brother's situation. They now have somebody to help them navigate their healthcare journey. We're no longer wondering who's on first base, who's in control of a patient's healthcare, who's making the decision to admit and where, who's making sure we're not doing unnecessary tests and procedures. That's solved for, whether you're using direct primary care or you're using a med manager to do it. But it also removes other barriers to care. No longer is somebody going to have to ask, who do I call? Where do I go? What's this going to cost? We've removed all of those barriers that prevent people from getting the necessary care that they need when they need it. The goal is early intervention. When you remove those three barriers, we're not going into the hospital by way of ambulance through the ER. We're not getting hospitalized 30 different times for something. Ideally, we're catching it earlier on because people are no longer worried about what does it cost. They're going in at the first onset of symptoms. They're getting it checked out. So what now? What do we do with this? We're all here. My hope for you at this conference, whether you've been in the business for 10 years or 10 days, everybody here, if you're here, recognizes the problem. We're all committed to solving it. My hope is that each of us will collaborate, will learn, will help each other, and will take things away from this conference that we can take back into our home communities and have immediate impact. Do we have a responsibility? I think we do. If not me, if not you, then who? We've left this up to other people for decades, and the problem is only getting worse. The market is evolving very rapidly. You can look at press releases from these health insurance carriers to see exactly where they're going. Who's going to fix that? And I believe not only do we have a responsibility to do the work, we have a responsibility to continue to spread the movement. We need to pull in more people that think like us. We need to help each other. Don't view each other as competitors. We're not. You know who our competitors are? The competitors are the other people that will not do the hard work to help the employers. We should be lifting each other up. We should be helping each other at every turn. This movement needs to grow. When I think of impact, and I love this picture. I mentioned to you the ability to strip out 25, 30% from our GDP earlier in the presentation. How do we do that? It's not going to come from the government. The government isn't solving that problem. You know where it comes from? It comes from each of you, working with your employers. Buy one client, 5 clients, 10 clients. An employer saves $500,000 in their health plan? Awesome. Guess what? That's $500,000 they didn't have before that they can invest in pay raises for employees, new equipment, that business expansion. We're diverting money from healthcare by the employer to other more efficient and effective means. It's a redistribution of capital within their business. We do it $10,000, $100,000, $500,000, $1 million at a time by employer. When I think about that impact, those solutions are not coming from the body of water. Those solutions only happen when an external force acts upon the water. That's you. You are that drop of water. Those ripples are the impacts that you have. That first big one is the impact you have on your employer client. That's the money they save that they're now able to reinvest somewhere else in their business. That second ripple is the employee who has lower costs, more money in their paycheck, more money in their bank account. Third ripple is their family. And on we go to their community, to the broader economy, to our society. I'm just one drop of water. Each of you is just one drop of water. This is what it looks like when each of us goes and makes our impact with our clients across the country, and that movement grows. But let's make no mistake, this is going to be a long journey. You see the horizon there. As soon as we get there and we think we've arrived, the market is going to change. Think about the evolution of healthcare and health insurance. Let's not even go back into the 90s. Let's just start at 2010 with the passage of the ACA. Think about the changes that have happened in the business models of hospitals, provider groups, the health insurers. Look at what's happened just over the last 3 years. We've got to stay on the path. As soon as we get to the horizon, the game is going to change. The market's going to evolve. We have to be committed to this for the long run. I'm excited to be here, guys. I'm excited to meet many of you for the first time. I'm excited for what's going to come for each of us from this conference. And I'm excited to get to work. Let's freaking go.